that I think we, at least the Mayor of New Haven, seemed to focus on, I focused on, and I think through the Amazon process, we recognized more. That, of course, the whole state can be looked at as one so small, so to speak, compared to some sections of other states. We looked at just the corridor, if you will, from generally New Haven and Bridgeport, and we tried to capture the assets in not only that, but in our presentation, whether it was 17 colleges, whether it was the coastline, whether it was the train stations, the wonderful availability of suburban housing, yet the two larger, I guess the state's largest urban centers that I'd like to think are going through, and statistics would support this, that are doing the right things to bring people, if it's a goal, we think it is, to bring people back living by and large in your center city and in your downtown areas. So some of that vibrancy was an element of good quality of life. But we really took a kind of a harder look at what assets we had and those that were, I would say, not necessarily positive. The I-95 corridor being one of them, the transportation challenge. And certainly that impacts us all. I don't mean I-95 necessarily, but transportation, our highway system, and our lack of, I think, the most effective and fluid transportation system, or mass transit, which I think would be the right thing. Even and the use or underutilization, if you don't mind me saying it, of the airports that we have. I felt even way back in the 90s, before there was an extension of the safety zone on the Sikorsky, which is in Stratford, but the Bridgeport area airport nonetheless. And of course, Mayor Hartford, I guess recently, was just in Hartford yesterday asking about relaxing or changing of state laws so that the East Hartford, but New Haven, East Haven, but New Haven Airport could also undergo at least some laxity on regulations to allow that for greater use. I think, as it was framed, we want flights not just to Philadelphia, but we want flights elsewhere. So I can't imagine, other than the local, very local issues centered around those two major transportation centers, and of course the capital costs, how it could be a negative for the region or for the state to look at those as elements of a more comprehensive, more effective, and I think beneficial transportation kind of plan for the future. So those things came into play, and were interesting. The particular city issue or city stuff in Bridgeport, the positive stuff, we had a phrase that said there's a new feel in Bridgeport, and that was a year ago or so, and we were talking about how we tried to change the vibe, if you will, for lack of a better term, the vibe of what was going on, and to push in some kind of more, not only credible, but more of a louder or more expansive way, some of the really good stuff that is going on. That kind of gets lost in all the stuff that comes out through the, no kick in the media, but through the media. So we talked about things that are going, and so you say, wait a minute, there's a $550 million investment in real dollars, all private money, coming into Connecticut, come from New Jersey. It's PSEG. It's a natural gas energy source that will replace the last coal burning plant in the state of Connecticut, which anybody who knows this much, which is about my depth of knowledge sometimes, knows that that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the environment, for the investment, because the coal burning plant will be decommissioned, and I hope ultimately be taken down. It's kind of a whole separate discussion, because it occupies some 50 acres on probably the most prominent peninsula on, I'd like to say, on the entire Connecticut coastline, but certainly on Bridgeport and on that section of the state, and would turn around, ultimately be cleaned up environmentally, and then become a premier development site, whatever the future may hold for that. And it's just, the options are endless. But what's happening now, even before you get to that, is they're spending in real dollars, by their numbers, $550 million. They've created at least hundreds of jobs. I don't know if it'll be thousands, because those things run fairly efficiently as they get going, but construction jobs, real jobs, and they're building tax-based growth at the same time, obviously, and they're supporting with cleaner energy. I think it's 485 megawatts of some 500,000 homes in the greater area. Now, those are not things that are happening every day everywhere, and when you see how cities survive, how cities and towns survive in Connecticut, and I think you guys are brighter than me, you'd agree, it's probably not the smartest system to have an over-reliance on property taxes to fund both local government and public education, but nonetheless, we do rely on that as one of the most aggressive taxes. The only way to increase your revenue source, other than state aid, grants, the only reliable, reoccurring, and the only one that's within your control, depending on the economy, I guess depends on how much control you have, is property taxes. So to have an influx of a new taxpayer that large come online, in addition to your one-shot permit fees, is a huge thing. It helps us do everything else that was mentioned or not in that film, from having enough money to pay for 100 new police officers, which we've just put the last class on, and we're already seeing a dramatic impact in neighborhoods in a positive way. We're not out of the woods completely, but we're seeing the advancements in community policing and greater police presence and all that go on. Or just to provide the basic services that a city the size of Bridgeport needs to provide. So it's important. The other one, which didn't come clear through on that, which I talk about all around the state, that's happening in Bridgeport as well, is we have another New York or out-of-state investment company, a developer, coming in. We originally put out an RFP for our theaters. We have a set of theaters, or twin theaters, called the Poli Majestic Theaters. And they were basically mothballed some 25 years ago, after there was no one who could come up with the money to refurbish them. And even if the money was provided, would have the operating subsidy, because most of these theaters, unless you're really good at fundraising and operating, lose money. And so there's a side of it that has to take on has to have community support, and there has to be some community benefit to it. But nonetheless, they're gorgeous, and they're landmarks, and they're basically museums that just need restoration. But you need a lot of money. We had a company called Exact Capital come in from New York. They responded to our RFP, and they said that they not only wanted to invest in redoing the theaters to their original grandeur, at least one of them, and then donate it back to the city or nonprofit, probably for the reasons we just discussed, if they're expensive to run, if you don't know how to run them, and they're not in the theater running business, donate it back to the city or nonprofit of our designated choice. They were going to build a second and third story hotel, a Marriott hotel above it. And then across the street, we'll build two, which will be the new tallest buildings in Bridgeport, for a new skyline, if you will, slightly towering above People's Bank, and then a 10 and a 12-story building as well, for a total investment of $415 million in 3 phases. So with 2 developments going on, you see almost $1 billion, or maybe roundly $1 billion of grand list growth that's referenced there. And it doesn't stop with those 2 projects. There's a lot of smaller ones, but there's also in the West End, for anybody who's had the pleasure of driving through, if you can drive through, not at rush hour, on I-95 coming from Fairfield, you'll see a lot of the buildings that were left vacant, and a lot of them were former factory buildings or warehouses. And it's not a good look, and nor is it a good use. But they're not easy reusers. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be able, many of you in this room know this business better than I do. You have to go in, you have to be able to parse the environmental issues with everything else, and the ability for effective reuse, especially if you're going into housing, of course, the standards and all that. And then you have to have the financial wherewithal to either have your own funds, or a combination of your own funds, lending sources, and then grants many times to make these things happen. But Gary Flacco, another New York developer, has come in. Most of his money, and there's state money there too, which is greatly appreciated, but most of his money, at least the lending part, is from the AFL-CIO. They apparently have a large pool of pension funds that they're investing in certain communities. And his first phase, and I'm making up the numbers a little bit, but they're about right, is around $100 million, and is in the process right now of converting at least some of those buildings over into housing, with the 15-foot windows that you can actually see on the upper floors out to the water. First floor, for those that know the project, will be both retail and a charter school. And he's also in talks with us about taking over most of those other buildings there to build out, which he refers to as probably close to $250 million of additional investment in that part of town, transform what that gateway will look like, and then provide the type of housing that is caught on in downtown Bridgeport, which is the reuse of some offices, in this case some warehouses, and I think add a vibrancy and opportunity for young people. Doesn't have to be young, but basically young people seems to be what the population is doing, coming back into and occupying these spaces, and they're really cool. One sideline story was when we did the old security building in Bridgeport. I don't think anybody knows what that building is, but it used to be the Workman's Comp office in Bridgeport. It's on Main Street. It's 1115 Main Street. And so a group came in, Spinnaker, who did a lot of the rebuilding or refurbishing in Norwalk as well. I went in to cut the ribbon, and I looked around, and I just saw this beautiful atrium, and I looked at the apartments and the view down Main Street, where you can see the arena on one end and overlook Long Island Sound and look over at the city. I ended up moving in myself. I rented the apartment, I lived there for a year, and really experienced what it was like to live downtown, and even went through the ups and downs of trying to put new parking meters in downtown, which caught a lot of press as well. But I was able to live an experience and say, wait, I know what the problems are, and hopefully we can fix some of them. So I could go on, and I should, about positive things that are happening, but there's more to cities than just the bright lights of investment, but those are critically important. As we talked about budgets before, and cities and the challenges, these are things that do, if all those things turn into taxable properties and groundless growth, it does elevate the foundation of your revenue source in a critical way. And at a time when if you don't have that, you're seeing reductions in allocations on a state level obviously for budgetary reasons. You're seeing change in direction in funding along with policies on a federal level, which can give you no comfort level. I think we've hung on a community development block grant again and again and again, but it's always a fight. And that doesn't, of course, go right into city budget, but it goes into direct services. As we know, we're an entitlement city. So there's more and more of this, and Moody's and Standard & Poor's, I think it was more Standard & Poor's. I think they were a little tougher in this last round of ratings. And when they came in, I think it was really the city of Hartford, and then of course the state was still in the state where I think we were the only one that didn't have a budget. So we came in, we had a capital issue we were doing, we had a bond issue we were doing, and it was probably the worst time to do it. Because we had lined up our ducks for the last 2 years with budget surpluses and 3-year financial plans and really put some pieces in place and could point to groundless growth and all these things, inefficiencies, and they all they wanted to know about was the city of Hartford. And all they wanted to know about what was going on with the state budget and what kind of revenues could you rely on. And we had our answers, and I'll answer some if it comes up in questions here. We had our answers why we were different than the city of Hartford scenario, and why what we had done and laid a strong foundation singularly or for multiple years, clearly with a reliance on the state and all the normal partnerships, and didn't have an answer, but couldn't answer some of the questions. But they seem to have recognized in that process that we had at least had a strong foundation despite factors that were beyond our control, and how to recognize groundless growth and I think efficiencies in a variety of things. Let me back up a little bit, and then I'm going to open up to questions. So I'll keep talking to your food's done. You get more than 2 minutes to eat. So the backdrop is this, and some of this is kind of the interesting and colorful. We'll touch on that too, and I don't mean to make light of it. But I did take over in 1991. For those of you that were around, and I don't see too many in the room, that although Patrick and I shared our war stories back then, Bridgeport was bankrupt. In other words, it had technically filed in federal court for protection under the U.S. bankruptcy laws. The law was, I think, changed, at least my recollection was, it was changed prior to that when New York, I think it was in the 70s, was thinking of teetering. And so they actually made a provision that allowed for governmental entities to, I think, avail themselves of they call it the protection of the bankruptcy laws that an individual corporation could file, right? So this would be something that protects. But obviously there's a implied stigma with that to a certain extent, and if you come out of it, I guess like Detroit did, you can look and move on quicker, and I think there's a lot of other factors that go into Detroit, what they're doing now, in addition to just what that was. But I had to take over a city that had an operating deficit, a multiple-year operating deficit, projected to be in a $330 million operating budget, projected over 5 years to be $250 million.
Oh, wow.
So you can run the numbers in your head quickly, but just match those two up. And that was based on a steady increase in your fixed costs which was not unreasonable. It also was also predicated on no increase in property tax revenue, and it was also predicated on, I think, a level, just major factors, a level of whatever other aid or grants there were, let's say state aid. But it wasn't like crazy. I mean, it was what was likely going to happen had things not been done on all the major elements of the city's budget that would have probably taken the city, had it not withdrawn it, to qualify for bankruptcy. Now, so I took office. Lowell Weicker was governor, and the mayor, my predecessor and him, were fighting dramatically, publicly, and over the bankruptcy. And if you knew Governor Weicker, then it was pretty easy to, have a little disagreement with him every now and then. So, but I think I was positioned anyways to come in as this young mayor who was going to try and fix the problems, and he was as helpful as he could be. I just remember being in his office. I don't mean this is any sidestep to what I thought he should have done, because he did a lot. But we went through all these things when we got up there, and he said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I said, well, what are you going to do right now? Because we have a deficit of some, I don't know, it was $20 million. And there was no direct bailout. We didn't get a check for 20 million or 40 million or anything like that. We did get a variety of things over time, and there was a assumption and a favorably financial transaction over the following year that helped us with some money, and I don't mean to make it insignificant, with the sale of the Beardsley Zoo to the state of Connecticut. They took over and then leased it back, and that was, I think, a smart deal for both the city and the state. And of course, what the governor had was he had federal open space money, so it made it easier for him to utilize the time. But that was a year and a half process to get that finally through. And but we did a lot of things that were, to the credit of those that were there, people stepped up. We had people come together from both labor and management, and I say this as I talk about how to fix or how to address these type of problems. And I'm not saying we have a claim on it, but we did do it successfully. But labor and management came together on a variety of fronts that they hadn't before. And the business community stepped up and was very supportive on initiatives, or either were supportive on initiatives or would lead on those that it seemed better for the business community to lead on and then for government officials to follow. And even grassroots citizens, I think, rallied around a variety of topics that they thought were important and helped us work through them, even the areas of cleaning up neighborhoods and public safety when we didn't have a lot of resources. And allowed us time to build, I think, the infrastructure, or the foundation, I should say, for the infrastructure that we needed in order to get the city to the next few steps. And we did that. And one of them was that we had to get the city's fiscal house in order and reduce what was going to be this cliff that we fall off financially. Fast forward through it, I can take you through on questions and answer some of the things that I thought were most important on how to get there, both internally, both with alternate or additional revenue sources, some of which would have been one shot, but we spread them over 3 years, because I think a one shot was a good idea for any financial planning. Ways in which we consolidated services, we reduced expenditures, revamped the city's healthcare plan, and was able to get it to the point where shortly thereafter we had balanced budgets the next 10 years in a row without raising the taxes. Was able to add what I think was needed in the areas of public safety, 100 new police officers, and I think we laid the foundation, we put the city in a position to entertain things like building a ballpark, where we brought in a baseball team, which brought family entertainment at downtown Bridgeport, which they hadn't seen in decades. And then following that, and these were with substantial state support partnerships, the arena. This was under when the Weicker was gone by now. And then the arena, and then we began the process of Steel Point, which is decades long now, but we're still coming up out of the ground now, and where the Bass Pro is, and some other things. But that was a very similar urban redevelopment project that involved a cleanup in a former UI plant, and it is underway now. And those were some of the kind of bigger economic development things that were able to take place once we had the city's finances in place. There was a financial review board, OPM knows well, at least Bob Dakers did, and others. They played an important role, I think, especially early on. In a partnership, in some ways, between the city and the state, in providing resources, not only just oversight, but staff resources to a city that was still developing, I think, the financial infrastructure although in order to, I think, more effectively monitor, project, and then be accountable in the areas of fiscal stability. Then I think towards the end, you went around, but I thought there was time for the review board to leave. And this was the inside baseball was, there was an agreement or disagreement on how that should work. We had to set out not only so many balanced budgets in a row, we had to have market access, we had to have a 3-year financial plan, a 5-year capital plan, and I don't remember, but it seemed like there was these, and of course all these things can be picked apart at. Then you put a 3-year financial plan together and everybody could agree or disagree on especially in the 3rd year, which you predicated your assumptions on, right? I mean, you just put aside the macroeconomics of it, you could even pick it apart. So we had some struggles in trying, but I thought it was important for the city to move out from under the Financial Review Board eventually. So that I thought that was a powerful message for Bridgeport at the time. We didn't have the union contract provisions that some of the other cities had, which would allow the board to come in and break the contracts. I think Waterbury had that and West Haven had that. We didn't have that. Ours was basically a review and an approval by the review board, and it was subject to the basic same negotiations or binding arbitration that everybody has now. So we didn't pick up this great leverage. We did, though, negotiate some substantial savings, short-term and long-term in the process. There's a lot more we could talk about. Now, the projects that are moving now, I think, is taking the city to the next level. Our goal is fiscal stability again, not just 1 year, 2 year, and then see challenges. Everything we do, we try and lay out for the next 3 years or plus, and then we balance that out with the cities. If you look at the backdrop, our debt structure, which was fairly inconsistent, just because that's the way changing administrations kind of do things. We tried to smooth out our debt structure so the city has predictability. When we go down to Wall Street, like we're going to do another bond issue, then we can talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it fits in. And hopefully in some cases it'll save us money, or if it saves us money now, how it's not going to push money towards the back end and put it on some other administration. Look, I kind of went all around a little bit and I talked longer than I want. I'm going to stop because I think if there's some questions or comments or ideas, that would be a good way to jump into areas that might be of particular interest, or where individuals here who have areas of expertise could share with me some of your thoughts. And then if you don't mind, I'm going to ask some individuals here some questions. Patrick.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. I really liked the Amazon video. Ob said we made history by seeing it today for the first time, and I think we may have made history because how many times have we seen a mayor of Bridgeport and a mayor of New Haven in sync in that way? And so my question or my thought is that I really think one of the things that really holds Connecticut back is our not willingness to look at the whole state as one economic entity. And I think about the fight that we had over the location of the ball field here in the Hartford area, where it became a New Britain versus Hartford thing, which I think is very destructive to the state as a whole. There was even arguments around Jackson Labs. Should it be in Hartford? Should it be in Farmington? When in any other part of the country, those would have been considered the same place,
Yeah.
And so I'm just sort of throwing that out there as first of all, applaud you for partnering with the Mayor of New Haven. I think that was an excellent presentation. And what more can we do to make sure that our town lines don't become such an impediment to economic progress?
It is tough. You know this better than I do. How easy or hard would it be to change the laws in Connecticut that even did anytime you look towards the concepts of, let's call it regionalization, you get, whoa, and a lot of it is, frankly, from the perspective of let's say the smaller town, that they're somewhat fearful of the larger city. They're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to get gobbled up. A little autonomy and say I have is going to get taken over by some, no disrespect to me, or rather some big city mayor who cares more about his part of what this region will be than he will about that part. I think that's some of it. And so I get that. I do think there's examples, not enough though, on an incentive basis in some of the magnet schools where, and I know we have them in Bridgeport, where they've become regional schools where they've provided some of the best opportunities for young people, and that suburban students will come to school in Bridgeport. And so I guess that's where we start, or where we need to push, is through incentives. How do we do it? Financial incentives, I think, for some cities and towns would work. And I get from Tony, from the Mayor of New Haven, and that she sees that bigger picture as well. I do. And so she asked me, the last three things that we talked about was, Joe, will you support me in expanding my airport runway? And will you get MGM to help and all this? And I'm like, by the way, you know, in Bridgeport, we have our own airport, so you gotta think, now I'm running this through my process, but it's a quick one. Wait a minute, you're 30 minutes away. We have our own airport right here, we need to expand the runway too. But of course I will. So as we do that kind of stuff and support each other, I don't mean personally, but just as regions or cities, I think that will begin to go. I also think that the other thing that's hard, and it's just my pet peeve, one of my issues that I want to develop, I think, for the state, is this property tax system that we rely on so heavily, and the disparity at times. We can get into the causes of why they're higher or low in different places, but the fact is that they are, I think, creates a greater division, so to speak, in some things. Sometimes it's where companies locate, sometimes, and we've seen that in Bridgeport region where, and I love Shelton, but you know, Shelton can steal companies from Bridgeport because they can offer a cheaper deal in a much nicer area. So I don't know, I've said the engines for Connecticut's new economy should be the cities. The cities should drive the new Connecticut economy. If that means investing in many things in cities that make it more affordable, whether it's through capital and infrastructure and supporting that continuously, and it makes it even more attractive to be in the cities for businesses and for residents. Maybe that's part of an equalizer for some of our big cities, so that that's one way of utilizing it as an incentive. But I agree with you, conceptually, it's the practical end of it I think we'll have trouble with.